Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lincoln Journal Star's Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin, your host, as usual. You might notice we got a friendly face back with us, Brent Wagner. Thankfully, you are back. You weren't scared away from the first time we got you on for a little volleyball day in Nebraska preview. You're ready to come back and
get bombarded
with questions again.
Hit me.
Well, of course. I mean, it's been a great start to the year. Undefeated, right? But the quality of play has been really good in my estimation too. But I think kind of the big topic, we'll get into some of the players, the matches specifically, go over what the last month or so has kind of looked like. But when we came on the pod a couple of weeks ago before Volleyball Day in Nebraska, we were kind of talking about the potential this group had. Obviously a lot of freshmen, young team. There was all this talk, about realizing that potential. Well, now it's reality. They're 15-0. How do you think that just this young group has kind of embraced that and performed at a very high level so far?
Oh, it's been really impressive. Kind of all the things that we said might need to happen for them to be successful, I think kind of have. The freshmen coming in and being good and seeing some improvement from, the sophomores and the juniors. And then you probably include Merritt Beeson in that, even though she was a transfer. I think her all-around game is probably better than it was when she was at Florida. But yeah, those freshmen have come in and played really well. I mean, they certainly have, each of them have things they need to be more consistent at. But yeah, I mean, when you bring in a recruiting class, I guess a coach would never tell you this, but you probably hope that 50% of them turn out to be what you thought that might be, or 60%, and they've definitely exceeded that. 4 of them starting, playing well. So yeah, everything's kind of adding up right now. I guess the defense was the other big thing. Nebraska's been known for its defense. Now you're bringing in all these new players. Can they have those skills and that mentality to keep that defense going? And I've had a few off matches defensively, but it's all adding up to where they're playing really well and winning.
Yeah, that's a good point. That the defense has still been at a very high level, even with all those changes this year. And usually Amy and me, we kind of go over some of these matches, very shortly, give some short thoughts on them. But want to get your thoughts on, of course, some of these big matches that have taken place the last couple of weeks. Those 2 big non-conference matches, Stanford and Kentucky, those were 2 before the season that they were looking to, as kind of, they'd learn a little bit about the team from those. Well, they go on the road, beat Stanford. That was a huge win. Come back and beat Kentucky as well. Just what do you think those 2 matches did? Did that give them a little bit of added belief going out there beating Stanford?
Yeah, definitely. The Stanford match was kind of showed them what they could be.
Mm-hmm.
Made them realize what they could be. Really tough road trip. The distance. Nebraska, I don't think it ever won there. They'd lost several matches to Stanford in a row. Stanford, really good team. 2 first-team All-Americans. Really tested them. Really tested Nebraska's defense, but Nebraska just kind of wore them down. And right from the get-go, they showed they could play. They had great balance. That's kind of another thing Nebraska hopes to be known for every year is its defense and its offensive balance. And that was especially the case in Stanford. I think they had like 15 more kills than Stanford, and that was because they were getting kills from every position, from Beeson, from the outside hitters, and from the middle blockers. So yeah, really impressive win, and then impressive to come back a few days later and play a pretty good Kentucky team. Not as good as Kentucky has been the last few years, but I believe that was a Sunday night match. I think those are always kind of difficult for student athletes, especially volleyball players. That's not a time that volleyball players are used to playing. So that was impressive to come back and beat Kentucky to finish off that week.
Yeah, so those big non-conference matches. And then, of course, once you finally get into Big Ten play, it's always going to be, a challenge, a grind to get through that. And opening it up with sweeps of Ohio State and Minnesota, very good Minnesota program. It's put a lot of good teams out there on the court. But once they finally get on the road, I'm sure, as Coach Cook knows, that's a whole new challenge altogether. And the match I want to talk about is the Purdue match. Pushing them to 5 sets, is nearly a really tough loss for the team. what about that match, going five? What have you heard from the players about the mentality, just kind of having to dig deep in that one and avoid a big road loss?
Yeah, that was another impressive win. That's a tough place to play. It's a real small gym, but they sell it out a lot. Big student section, students are right by you, kind of yelling at you and things like that. And then that fifth set was really impressive. Merritt Beeson came up big. Harper Murray came up big, and once I think that was the first 5 set match. So those are what you got to get out quick, and they did that, and that was impressive.
Yeah, I was kind of like vaguely paying attention to that match, and then I'd gotten back on Twitter and I saw you had you was fourth set, you had tweeted out. I was like, okay, I better turn this thing on because it was going to be one that goes down to the end, and it definitely did. But yeah, they really played well in that fifth set. That late run at the end, as you said. But then they also went and played Indiana. Indiana won that first set, and Nebraska came back to win the next three. Finished that road stretch, beat Michigan State and Michigan. So that was four four road matches over 2 weeks, not all together. But coming back home now, having gone through that first road stretch, there are some big matches coming up. And the first one, of course, I think Penn State coming up this week. They're always one of the best programs. Maybe not the same heights. I haven't watched every one of their matches or anything. But what do you think of the matchup, the challenge that Penn State's going to pose here at Devaney?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. They're playing really well. That's got the potential to be one of the best offenses in the Big Ten because they have a great setter, Mac Pedraza, who was at Ohio State. On their great team last year, Ohio State had a bunch of freshmen coming in, so they had to tell those super seniors that they didn't have spots for them. She transfers to Penn State. So does Jess Maruzik from Michigan after Michigan has a coaching change. So great offense for Penn State. That'll be a real good test for Nebraska's defense. And then also if Nebraska can kind of get better at its serving. Nebraska's had some serving error problems recently and overall just needs to get better at serve and pass. So that'll be a real big test for Nebraska on Saturday.
Yeah, Michigan State also coming to town. And we'll have a big matchup after that. We'll get into that one here at the end of our volleyball segment.
We can look ahead. It's okay for us.
Absolutely. But the record's 15-0. And just looking at the team, I think you have to start with the setter, of course, Bergen Riley. That was a big question mark, especially after what transpired last year with Kennedy Orr, Nicklin Hames having that situation. But Bergen came in, started the first match. Just from what I've seen, I think she's been playing at a very high level. Great passing, but obviously you've been watching these very closely. You've seen a lot of great setters too. But as a freshman, how good has she been?
She's been really good. She's really good, especially early on. Real consistent, real smooth, real good at setting the right side hitter position. It's gone really well. Certainly, she kind of struggled or wasn't as consistent last week. Was a little pretty high in some sets. Her and Andy Jackson need to kind of get back to where they were. Some of that's just that the teams are better and they know what Andy Jackson is good at now. So Andy Jackson needs to vary up her shots a little bit. But it's gone extremely well. Great competitor. Really smooth. She's played, a lot of big matches with the national team, and you can definitely see that. And with her club team, she played up a lot of age groups, so you can definitely see her experience, and it's been really good for Nebraska so far.
Yeah, certainly. And they've had several matches, where they've been swinging at such a high level, and of course that's a credit to her, for getting those passes, staying in system, all those different things, but. Also at the beginning of the year, we were kind of wondering about the hitter rotation, who would get the most opportunities out there. Well, Merritt Beeson, Harper Murray, tied for the team lead in kills, 184 apiece so far. Andy Jackson, Lindsey Krause, Becca Alec also getting a lot of kills, being productive there on offense. And maybe that's not a surprise, how things have played out, but Harper Murray as a freshman, been really impressive, and Merritt Beeson coming up in a lot of big moments there too.
Yeah, Beeson's definitely been one of the most consistent, which is obviously what you hope for as a junior. Somebody who's played with a lot of experience. And Harper Murray, obviously a very explosive athlete. And it's been impressive how she's, early on teams have picked on her. They're going to pick on her. They're going to serve at her and try to slow her down that way. And it's been successful at times, but she's still she's getting better. It seems like at her serve receive, and even when that's not going well, she's still finding ways to help the team with defense and hitting. And it's been really impressive.
Yeah, middle blocker's been a big part, of course, of that defense. And when we look at this rotation a little bit, I'm looking at mostly numbers here because again, I haven't watched every set. But you have Lexi Rodriguez, Merritt Beeson, Bergen Riley, Harper Murray, the only 4 Huskers to have played every set so far this year. And a couple of the more interesting ones, Lindsey Krause, 38 of those 52 sets played, did miss a couple matches, so that's factored in. But Allie Batenhorst, 23, Maisie Bosaker, 23 sets, Maggie Mendelson, only 14, just got back in the rotation, I believe, this week a little bit. Just what do you make of the way that Coach Cook has kind of approached that rotation in terms of the players that he's getting out there the vast majority of the time, and the others who are maybe he has to pick and choose the moments a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, he wants to find a regular group it's going to be your main players, but he's also not afraid to go to the bench because they have great players. So if Lindsey Krause, I mean, a lot of it was that she got injured. She was in a car accident. Then Allie Batenhorst came in and played well and was really good defensively. So he's got a really good situation where if one of them isn't producing, he can go to the bench, and maybe that's just for a set. Maybe that's for the remainder of the match. So if Lindsey isn't consistently producing, he can go to Allie Batenhorst. He did a little bit with Becca Alec. So Becca Alec, she just wasn't very aggressive one match and wasn't getting a lot of block touches. So they brought Maggie Mendelson in, and she played pretty well. Obviously, Becca is the better player, the more experienced player. But if things aren't going well, he can mix it up and go to Maggie.
Yeah, I think we see this a lot, just how the rotations kind of change over the course of a season. Players, get upswings, downswings, all sorts of stuff like that. So I anticipate there'll be some bigger rotations coming up, obviously down the stretch. And just to get your perspective too on, yes, the record's 15-0, but how well do you think they're playing right now? Are they playing at a level where you could see this type of success be sustainable over the course of the rest of the season?
I don't know that the Big Ten is as strong as it has been in the middle and things like that. So, obviously the big one is we'll find out in a week when they play Wisconsin for the first time. That's when you'll have a better gauge of what this team is. Then they'll play Wisconsin again in the last week of the regular season. So, yeah, that's the big test. Wisconsin's going to test their defense. They have a lot of firepower offensively. They've been running a 2-setter rotations, so 3 big hitters in the front row. A lot of things have gone really well, but Nebraska's also had some problems with serving errors. That hasn't cost them a match yet, but obviously when you play Wisconsin, you're expecting you're going to have close sets. So, a few points here or there could be the difference. So we'll know a lot more a little over a week from now when they play Wisconsin.
Yeah, certainly. Like you said, we can look ahead a little bit, but of course the team has several matches to get to before then. But yeah, that's the big one. People are looking to those 2 top Big Ten teams, 2 top teams nationally, for that matter, in that matchup. And I want to ask, Wisconsin's had Nebraska's number. Cook's admitted it. Everybody who watches, national college volleyball can see that. How big do you think it would be for this team with all of its potential to finally kind of be that one that can maybe shift that a little bit and stand up there to Wisconsin?
Oh, it'd be massive just because it would give you a chance to win the Big Ten. And Nebraska hasn't won the Big Ten for several years because Wisconsin's been winning the Big Ten. So yeah, it's just the Big Ten title is a huge thing in any sport, and that's especially the case in volleyball. And that's not to say you can't lose another match in the Big Ten, but last year I think Wisconsin only had one loss in the during the Big Ten season. So if you can be one of the teams if you can make sure that they have at least one loss, that'd be good. They continue to give Nebraska confidence. Those young players, and then those old, the juniors that have lost to Wisconsin so many times. So that's certainly would be a big shot of confidence for them as well.
And certainly a big crowd, energetic crowd. I mean, we know obviously that happens every time, but right after football game, I imagine there'll be some dual crossover there between some of those fans. Our Amy Just was a little unhappy about the timing. She wants to be at football and volleyball, but I'm sure the fans will like it. Easy to make their way over to Devaney from Memorial Stadium on that day, Saturday, October 21st. Wisconsin comes to town. So that's our kind of volleyball check-in, with the record being 15-0. We'll let you have a couple weeks off without some podcast action, but we'll expect to hear back from you, Brent, before we get to postseason play.
All right.
Awesome. So that'll do it for our volleyball portion, and we'll move on to some football. Appreciate Brent coming on for some volleyball talk as usual, but wanted to get into football as we usually do. Nebraska coming off a big win over Illinois, 20-7. If you're wondering why there's no Amy with me this week, she's at Big Ten Media Days, checking in on the men's and women's basketball teams. So we'll hear from her next week about what she learned, about kind of the big season goals for the team. But of course, today, looking at some football action, already reacted to some of this stuff on the field, but that 20-7 win, I think just evidence that Nebraska was responding to Matt Rule's fire, his motivation all week long. Definitely there was some tension in the building, in the Nebraska football facilities heading into that Illinois game, but just seeing some of those on-field celebrations afterwards, it was very clear that kind of a weight was lifted off these players' shoulders. And that's huge going into the bye week. Having that season outlook at 3-3 as compared to 2-4, just so much better, so much more optimism. And in terms of their schedule for the week, the team, they had a couple days off, practiced, I believe today. They will practice again the next couple of days. But as they head towards the weekend, the coaches are going to get out on the recruiting trail. Players will have a couple of days off. Some of them may be able to go home, recover a little bit, some much needed time to rest here during the bye week. But a couple more big picture things here. As we are 6 weeks into the year, I'm going to pose 3 things that we've learned, 3 things that we're still wondering about. And I guess I don't really have answers. It's for all of you at home to decide as you listen to. But starting with the things that we have definitely learned 6 weeks into the year, number one is that this defense will keep Nebraska competitive against most opponents. And I say that because we saw the Michigan game. The defense still had its moments, but Michigan kind of rolled over them. Again, that was elite offensive personnel there from Michigan, national championship contender. So I think that's pretty much the only exception. I think for the rest of the Big Ten teams on Nebraska's schedule, no Ohio State, no Penn State, none of those other top tier teams in the conference, I think this defense will keep Nebraska competitive. And that was something that I got the chance to ask Rule about today, about the team's outlook, its potential for those next 6 games. And he said that every game is winnable for Nebraska, but at the same time, they can lose all of them too. So it's the defense that will keep them in it. The offense has to keep up its end of the bargain as well. And that's the second thing that we've learned. This offense is limited and the skill positions need some development. And in particular, we learned today, wide receiver Marcus Washington tore his ACL. He will be out for the rest of the year. Big loss. Isaiah Garcia Castanedo also tore his ACL in week 1. And it's really kind of limited this offense overall. The wide receivers, Billy Kemp and Alex Bullock, they've been out there a lot. They do a lot of good things, but you need more wide receivers than just that. And so it's going to be the freshmen, Malachi Coleman, Jalen Lloyd, Jaden Doss are the 3 in particular who the Husker coaches expect to step up, take on a bigger role this week and moving forward. So we'll see what happens there at running back. Anthony Grant, think he's been a great runner, but those fumble issues still popping up. We saw some explosiveness from Josh Fleeks. Emmett Johnson has gotten the game too. So still some question marks there at running back about who's going to be able to do it consistently over the course of the next 6 weeks. And the final thing that we've learned so far is that there are signs of progress, but old mistakes keep on cropping up. And this is something Rule has talked about, how it's not going to be a quick fix. It's developmental process that he's put into place. He did that at Temple. He did that at Baylor. And in particular, those first 2 years at those schools, different situations, but I think 1-2 wins, those were the records. So already 3-3, that's more success in his first year of a rebuild than he has yet, but perhaps more talent with this Nebraska team than others. And those old mistakes, those are the fumbles. Those are things that have hurt Nebraska across coaching staffs, across years, regardless of personnel, players, coaching. Fumbles have been a big, big issue, and penalties so far this year also been a big issue. That's something that has carried over from the last 2 or 3 seasons. And as for 3 things that we're still wondering about for these final 6 weeks, the first one is the quarterback position. Is this Heinrich Haarberg's team, or will Jeff Sims get another chance after healing up? And this is a topic that I can guarantee you Amy and I are going to debate next week. It's something that we'll hopefully hear more from the coaching staff in terms of Sims' status. But if I had to give my opinion about which way I'm leaning, I do think that Heinrich Haarberg has earned that opportunity to keep going out there, to keep leading the offense. And in particular, I think, it's a tough break for Sims, because of that injury, but the offense was pretty limited in those first 2 weeks, lots of turnovers. And versus Haarberg, there's still been some turnovers. His accuracy in the passing game is kind of a concern, but for the most part, he has limited those mistakes, done exactly what Nebraska has needed him to do, lean on that defense, get some offensive production when needed. He's been a great runner. Both those quarterbacks are great runners. So this is something that we'll continue to track, see what happens there during the bye week and as they practice leading up to Northwestern, that quarterback situation. Second question about the offensive line. When will this offensive line show major improvements? And I say major because I do think that there have been minor improvements compared to last year. I think they've been better in the run game generally. There's been some series, and I think, during the third quarter, during this Illinois game, they were opening up some big holes for Grant to run through. But still, there's been times, whether it's Illinois, you look to week 1, Minnesota, any of these different opponents where opposing defensive lines have gotten penetration, 1 yard, 2 yard losses, or holding, some gains that maybe could have been 4 or 5 yard gains to just 1 or 2 yards, perhaps if they were better blocked. But I do think run game has been better, and pass protection has been marginally better, I think, too. But still, it's really tough for those tackles. That's the toughest spot to pass protect on. If you're going one-on-one against some of these defensive ends, these edge rushers in the Big Ten, it is just such a tough challenge. Personally, I'd like to see Nebraska utilize tight ends a little bit more, chip them off the edge. And this is also an area where losing Ramir Johnson is a big, big loss. Week 3 season-ending injury. He was third down back, really good in pass protection. Gabe Irvin also the same. So that's something to watch forward as well, is that the pass protection, not just the offensive line, but needing to show improvements in that area. And the third final burning question we kind of got heading into these final 6 weeks, is this team capable of making it to a bowl game? And before the year, we make our season predictions. I would have said yes. I projected Nebraska 6-6. Those games, we won't get into those, which games I predicted wins and losses. Maybe that's changed a little bit over the course of the year. But I think having this 3-3 record, you would say yes, they are capable of making it, especially considering the next 2 games that Nebraska has coming up at home this month. Northwestern and Purdue, 2 teams that have not shown a whole lot, who have struggled, who've had several losses. 2 games that Nebraska definitely feels it can win. Thinking about going into November with a 5-3 record would be very, very formidable position to be in. But you look at that November slate and you think, where's that 6th win going to come from? Michigan State would be the obvious one. That is a road game, but they're having a tough year. Not great quarterback play, not a great team performance overall from Michigan State so far this year. Maryland also coming to Nebraska. And then you got games against Wisconsin and Iowa, the 2 front runners so far in the Big Ten West. those, as we sit right now, look pretty tough. So I think if you're thinking about a path towards bowl eligibility, winning these next two, that's the easiest way to get it done. Then you only have one more final one to go. If they do split those games 4-4, there's still potential there. There's still a path. But when you're thinking about a bowl game, these next two are very, very big. But as we all know, the Nebraska coaching staff, they're very week to week. They're not going to get ahead of themselves. And we'll see if the players do the same. So that's our short little football update. Again, wish I had an Amy here to tell me that my opinions stink or whatever. We'll get that next week. We'll get basketball updates, much more football discussion, personnel. We'll preview Northwestern, give you a prediction, look ahead to the second half of Nebraska's schedule. But for now, that'll do it for this week's episode of Life in the Red. Appreciate all of our regular listeners and viewers. We'll see you next week.